I had always dreamed of owning a lake house. Not just any lake house, but one tucked away where the water kissed the trees, where the sunrise hit the dock just right, and where life moved a little slower. The kind of place where you could breathe without feeling the weight of the world pressing down. I thought, finally, peace. I didn't know that the peace I imagined was about to be tested in ways I couldn't even picture. The first day I arrived, I unloaded my truck, my hands stiff from hauling boxes, and stepped onto the dock. The water shimmered like liquid glass, birds sang, and everything felt perfect. I inhaled, thinking I could finally relax. That calm, that moment, lasted all of 30 seconds. Because then she appeared. HOA Confessionals. I swear she popped up out of nowhere, clipboard in hand, wearing a perfectly pressed blazer that looked like it had never met a dirt road. Her heels clicked against my driveway like a metronome of doom. And her smile, oh, that smile. The one that promised judgment and paperwork in equal measure. "Hello," she said, voice saccharine but sharp. "I'm Karen, HOA president. Welcome to our community." I smiled politely. "Thank you, I just moved in. It's beautiful here." Karen's eyes swept over my property, narrowing as if she were scanning for offenses invisible to everyone else. "Yes, it's quaint," she said, tilting her head like a hawk. Then came the words that made my stomach drop. "You're required to join the HOA. All homeowners do. We have rules here." Rules? I'd expected rules, sure. But the way she said it, like she owned the air I breathed, the trees I admired, the dock I'd built with my own hands. I tried to laugh it off. "I'll read them over, I'm sure it's fine." Karen's smile never wavered. "Oh, it's more than fine, it's mandatory, and there are fines for non-compliance, large fines." I nodded, trying not to let my unease show. "I see." She started rattling off rules. How my boat must face north on certain days, where my trash bins could live, the exact angle my dock could extend into the lake. Each rule was more absurd than the last, delivered with the kind of precision only a person who lives to police other people's lives could muster. I laughed, not out loud, but the laugh that escapes when you're trying to convince yourself you're not trapped in a nightmare. Then came the kicker, the part that made my blood run cold and my mind race. Karen leaned in, voice low, like she was sharing a secret meant to terrify me. "If you don't join, we can call the authorities." Authorities, the cops, on me, because I hadn't signed a piece of paper agreeing to her little kingdom. I felt my heart skip a beat. I looked at her, at the clipboard, at the neatly trimmed grass she probably measured with a ruler, and I realized something important. I was in a war I hadn't seen coming, and Karen thought she had the upper hand. But here's the thing about me. I never panic. Not in firefights, not in courtrooms, not on docks with overzealous HOA presidents breathing down my neck. I just smile, because sometimes the storm is coming, and the only way to survive it is to stay calm and wait for the perfect moment to act. I nodded politely. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice calm. Karen's eyes narrowed. She handed me a stack of papers thicker than a New York phone book. "We'll be watching," she said, her tone implying that she already had my life planned out for me. And then she left, heels clicking like a countdown clock. I looked down at the papers and laughed quietly to myself. They didn't know. None of them knew, because what Karen didn't realize was that I didn't just own the house she was trying to control. I owned the lake, the dock, and, well, most of the blocks surrounding it. Every inch she thought she could boss around. Mine. I set the papers on my table, smiling to myself. The real question now was, how long would it take Karen to find out she wasn't the one in charge? Little did I know, she was about to test that patience in ways I never could have predicted. And when she did, it would be a showdown she'd never forget. Because sometimes, the calm before the storm is just the beginning of the story. Karen's first attempt to enforce her rules, and the tension escalates when she hints at calling the cops. The morning after Karen's visit, I woke up thinking maybe it was just a one-time power trip. She'll get bored. I couldn't have been more wrong. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, ready to enjoy the lake, and saw her again. Yes, HOA Karen, standing at the edge of the property, clipboard in hand like a general inspecting her troops. She didn't even knock this time, just marched right up like she owned the place. "Good morning," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to check if you had thought about joining the HOA. I sipped my coffee, pretending to be casual like this was just a neighborly chat. I'm still looking over the paperwork, I said. She huffed, clearly annoyed at my lack of urgency. Well, there are consequences for refusing, fines, complaints, and yes, even involving the authorities. The words hit me like a slap. Authorities? Again, she was serious. My calm lake morning suddenly felt like standing at the edge of a cliff in the middle of a storm. I decided to play it smart. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, I said, smiling. I'd like to handle this peacefully. Her smile didn't waver. Peacefully? Oh, you'll see, sometimes peace requires correction. And that's when she started walking my property, pointing at things like a drill sergeant. Your dock is too close to the water line. Your garden gnome violates landscaping rules. That mailbox, non-compliant. I watched her carefully, pretending to take notes. Inside, I was shaking my head in disbelief. She thought she could dictate every inch of my land, the land I legally owned with documents to prove it. It was almost funny if it weren't so absurd. Then came the moment that made my stomach sink. Karen pulled out a phone and without hesitation dialed. Oh no, I thought. She's calling the cops already. I put down my coffee and stepped forward. Karen, you don't need to. But it was too late. She was already speaking in her sharp, precise tone. Yes, officer, I have a resident refusing to comply with the HOA. We may need assistance enforcing the rules. I took a deep breath and reminded myself to stay calm. This was just the beginning. Officers would arrive, they'd see the truth, and Karen would look foolish. But still, I could feel my blood pressure rising. And then it happened. From behind the trees, I heard the distinct sound of a siren approaching. My neighbors, who had been pretending to water their lawns, now watched with wide eyes as the law of the neighborhood rolled toward my property. When the officers arrived, Karen greeted them like a queen greeting her knights. This homeowner is refusing to comply, she said, pointing directly at me. We may need to issue citations or... I held up my hands calmly. Good morning, officers. I'm happy to explain everything. The look on their faces was priceless. Confusion mixed with disbelief as I handed them the property deeds, the legal documents, everything proving ownership. Their jaws dropped as they scanned the paperwork. Karen, meanwhile, looked like she just realized someone had replaced her crown with a cardboard cutout. One officer cleared his throat. Ma'am, he owns this property. Karen blinked. No, that can't be right. Oh, it's right, I said, suppressing a smile. You see, I own the lake, the dock, the property, and, well, most of the block around here. The rules you're trying to enforce don't apply to me. The silence that followed was golden. Karen's face turned red, then purple, and she started sputtering excuses. I didn't interrupt. I let her self-destruct. As the officers left, giving me a nod of reassurance, Karen stormed off, muttering about next steps and legal action. I watched her heels click away, the sound like a countdown clock to the next ridiculous confrontation. I couldn't help but laugh, shaking my head. She had no idea, not just about me, but about the storm she'd just started. And I had a feeling things were about to escalate in ways she wouldn't see coming. Because Karen didn't just poke the bear, she unknowingly woke up the entire forest. Karen's next move, escalating her harassment, trying to intimidate neighbors, and pushing boundaries she has no right to cross. After the police left, I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen would finally back off. That naive hope lasted until the next morning. I was sipping my coffee, watching the lake mist curl over the water like a slow-moving fog, when I noticed her car parked halfway down the road. Of course, it was HOA Karen, and she wasn't alone this time. She had brought reinforcements, or what she probably thought were reinforcements, a clipboard army of perfectly coiffed neighbors ready to witness her authority. I smiled to myself. Oh, this is getting good. Karen marched up my driveway like a general leading a battalion. Good morning, she said, voice dripping with false sweetness. I wanted to talk to you about the fines and compliance notices. I raised an eyebrow. Fines, notices. Yes, she said, tapping her clipboard. You're in violation of multiple HOA rules. Your dock, your landscaping, your everything. You really should have joined the HOA already. I let her speak, nodding like a patient parent listening to a toddler throw a tantrum. Inside, I was thinking about how ridiculous all of this was. She truly believed she had power over my property. Then came the part that made my blood run cold. Karen, in front of her little army of neighbors, started pointing fingers and whispering loudly. He's breaking the rules, and no one is doing anything about it. If he doesn't comply, the fines will pile up and will have to escalate. I couldn't help myself. I stepped forward, calm, smiling. "Excuse me," I said, voice steady, like I was delivering the opening lines of a dramatic courtroom scene. "But I think you've forgotten something. I own this property, all of it. The house, the dock, the land. I don't answer to the HOA. Her face went through a series of expressions faster than I could track. Shock, disbelief, fury, and finally, denial. "No," she said sharply. "That's impossible. You can't just—" "Watch me," I interrupted, holding up the deeds, legal documents, survey maps, all the proof that she couldn't argue away. The neighbors, who had been staring at me in awkward silence, suddenly shifted. Some were whispering, others were nudging each other, clearly realizing the power dynamics had just flipped. Karen's voice rose. "This isn't fair, the HOA is." Yes, I said, cutting her off gently because I wasn't here to humiliate her yet. "The HOA is for homeowners, but I am the homeowner. Actually, more than just that. I own most of the surrounding properties too, so technically—" I let the pause hang in the air like a suspenseful drumbeat. "I am the HOA." The silence that followed was delicious. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole, her cheeks red, her lips trembling. One neighbor even stifled a laugh. Another just shook his head, muttering, "Wow, didn't see that coming." Karen's next words were frantic. "That doesn't matter. There are rules, there are bylaws, you can't just—" I stepped closer, voice low but steady. "Karen, let me make it simple. You can't enforce your rules on land you don't own. And while I'm happy to play nice, you might want to rethink the way you've been treating your neighbors and me. Otherwise—" "Otherwise what?" I let her imagination fill in the blanks. I didn't have to threaten. The documents did all the work. She stomped away, muttering about lawyers and the city, while her clipboard army followed, avoiding my eyes. I leaned against my railing and watched them leave, sipping my coffee with the kind of satisfaction you only get when you've just reminded someone who's really in charge. But even as I enjoyed the small victory, I knew this was far from over. Karen wasn't someone who backed down easily. She thrived on control, on micromanaging, on feeling powerful. And now, she'd been humiliated in front of the people she thought were her loyal subjects. The question wasn't whether she'd come back, it was when and with what. I couldn't help but laugh quietly to myself. Let her come, the game has only just begun. Little did she know, her next move would be her most desperate yet. And when that day came, it would set the stage for a showdown that would leave the entire block talking for months. Because Karen didn't realize something very important. I don't just play by the rules, I write them. Karen's escalating harassment and her next desperate attempt to assert control, leading to tension with neighbors and unexpected twists. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the sun sparkled off the lake and you could almost forget reality existed. Almost. Because in my case, reality had a name, Karen. I was sitting on my dock, feet dangling above the water, when I saw her car creeping down the road again. This time, she didn't come alone. No, Karen had apparently decided that her intimidation tactics needed reinforcements. She had brought along a few of the neighbors who clearly thought that following her around would earn them some kind of brownie points. I watched them march toward me, clipboards in hand, expressions a mix of determination and nervousness. Karen's presence alone made the air feel heavier, like a storm cloud hovering over my little slice of paradise. "Good afternoon," she called, voice a little sharper than usual. "I just wanted to check on your compliance and remind you about the fines." I leaned back on my elbows, smiling, letting the breeze wash over me. Fines again? I was hoping for a more peaceful day. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Peaceful? This isn't about peace. It's about rules, regulations, and ensuring that everyone follows the bylaws. You're in violation of multiple standards. I held up my hands, trying to stay calm while my mind raced. Standards? Rules? She has no idea. Karen, I said, voice calm, almost teasing, you keep talking about violations and bylaws, but haven't you noticed? I own all this land, the dock, the house, even most of the surrounding properties. The rules you're trying to enforce don't apply to me. Her jaw dropped, her clipboard trembling slightly. One of the neighbors beside her tried to whisper, maybe she owns it. But Karen waved them off. No, she said, her voice rising. You can't just... Watch me, I interrupted gently, gesturing toward the papers I had neatly placed on my table for reference, though I hadn't even needed them this time. My calm demeanor contrasted with her rising panic, and I could see that it was starting to unnerve her. Karen took a step closer, leaning in as if proximity would magically give her authority. I will not allow this. I am the president of this HOA. You will join, or... I stopped her mid-sentence, stepping forward with a steady gaze. Or what, Karen? Call the cops again? Because last time they left confused and very aware of who actually owns this land. Her face turned red, veins visible at her temples. This isn't over, you'll see. I'll find a way to make you comply. You won't get away with this. I couldn't help but smirk. Oh, Karen, you really have no idea. She turned and marched back down the road, muttering threats under her breath, leaving a trail of awkward neighbors behind her. I watched them scatter like leaves in the wind, some sneaking glances at me, realizing that the dynamic of the neighborhood had just shifted. As I walked back to my dock, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. Karen had just revealed her true nature. She wasn't a reasonable person. She thrived on control, on micromanaging every inch of property she could influence. And now, having failed to intimidate me, she would only become more desperate. I sat down, letting the calm lake water soothe my nerves, but deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Karen's next move would be her most desperate yet. She would escalate, push boundaries further than ever before, and test my patience in ways I hadn't imagined. And I would be ready. Because when someone like Karen tries to assert power where none exists, the fallout is inevitable. Rules, fines, and bylaws mean nothing when ownership and authority are on your side. I smiled quietly to myself, shaking my head. She thinks she's running the neighborhood. She doesn't know she's already lost. Little did I know, Karen's obsession with control would soon drag the entire block into chaos, and the neighbors, those who had been too timid to speak up, would be forced to pick sides. Some would cheer silently for me. Others, well, they'd regret siding with the wrong person. Because in the game Karen had started, only one thing was certain. She didn't realize who she was dealing with, and when she finally did, it would be too late. Karen's next desperate tactic, sending letters, involving lawyers, and attempting to intimidate neighbors while she is completely unaware of your full ownership and authority. It was another quiet morning on the lake, or at least it should have been. I was sipping my coffee, enjoying the calm, when I noticed an envelope sticking out of my mailbox. Thick, official-looking, and unmistakably Karen. I tore it open and immediately recognized her handiwork. Formal letters, citations, and the kind of legal jargon that sounded intimidating to anyone who didn't know better. But I did. I owned every inch of this block. Every rule she tried to enforce was meaningless. Still, she was escalating. This wasn't just passive-aggressive visits anymore. She was trying to involve neighbors, the law, and her HOA committee to pressure me into compliance. And I could feel her desperation leaking from every word on that paper. I laughed quietly. She thought she could outmaneuver me with paperwork. What she didn't realize was that I had the ultimate trump card, ownership, and patience. The next thing I knew, she was back, standing on the edge of my property with her usual haughty expression, clipboard in hand, letters clutched like weapons. But this time she had brought reinforcements. 2 neighbors she clearly thought would witness my defiance and side with her. "Good morning," Karen said, voice sweet but tense. "I just wanted to make sure you received my letters. They are very important." I leaned casually against the railing of my dock, letting the water ripple beneath me. "I received them, very thorough, thank you." She frowned. You know these citations are serious. You could be fined hundreds, even thousands of dollars. I raised an eyebrow, letting a small smile curl across my lips. Interesting, because last time I checked, fines can only be applied by the HOA to property they actually control. And as I mentioned before, I own most of this block. Her jaw dropped. No, that's impossible. Yes, I said calmly. Completely possible and entirely legal. You can write all the letters you want, Karen, but the rules you're trying to enforce don't apply to me. She took a deep breath, clearly flustered, and muttered something about next steps while glancing nervously at her neighbors. I could see the panic spreading. They had come to back her up, but now they looked uncertain, even intimidated. Karen, desperate to regain control, raised her voice. You will join the HOA? You will comply. This isn't negotiable. I laughed aloud this time. Karen, it's negotiable. Everything is negotiable, except your authority over my property. That's non-existent. She stormed off, muttering threats under her breath, but this time she left the neighbors behind. They stayed, glancing between me and the retreating figure, some whispering to each other, others nodding subtly in acknowledgement of the truth. I walked over to my mailbox and pulled out another letter, this one marked Final Notice. It was thick, full of legal threats, and signed with all the confidence of someone who thought they had the upper hand. I smiled. Final notice from someone with no authority. How quaint. I spread the letters across my table, reading each one carefully. I could almost hear Karen's frustration seeping through the paper. Every threat, every fine, every attempt at intimidation, it all revealed her desperation. And the more desperate she became, the more mistakes she made. Because here's the thing about people like Karen. They underestimate the consequences of pushing someone who actually holds the power. She thought fear and authority would work. She thought she could control the narrative. But she didn't realize she was walking into a trap of her own making. As I looked out at the lake, I knew the next encounter would be her most dramatic yet. She would escalate further, perhaps even involve the courts, and when she did, the entire neighborhood would finally see who truly controlled the block. I leaned back in my chair, letting the sunlight warm my face, and thought, she thinks she's running the neighborhood. She has no idea the storm she's about to face. And I had a feeling it would be spectacular. Karen escalates to legal threats, and possibly involving the authorities again, setting up a tense showdown where she finally realizes she may have bitten off more than she can chew. The day started quietly, but the tension in the air was thick enough to slice with a knife. I could feel it even before I stepped outside. Karen was planning something. Her visits, letters, and relentless citations had escalated to a level that suggested she wasn't just annoyed, she was desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. I was fixing the railing on my dock when I saw her car pull up. Not just Karen this time, she had a lawyer's business card sticking out of her hand, and a look that screamed, I've brought reinforcements from the legal system. I paused, screwdriver in hand, and watched the parade of self-importance approach. Good morning, she said, voice syrupy with fake politeness, but I could hear the tremor underneath. I've brought legal counsel to make sure you understand the seriousness of your violations. Ignoring the HOA has consequences. I put down the screwdriver and crossed my arms. Legal counsel, huh? Interesting, because the documents I have here, property deeds, survey maps, ownership records, already make one thing very clear: I own this property. You cannot enforce HOA rules here. Period. The lawyer blinked, adjusting his glasses. Ma'am, I think you're misunderstanding. The HOA has bylaws that apply to all residents. Yes, I said, smiling, but I'm not just a resident, I'm the owner. The house, the dock, the land around the lake, most of it belongs to me. I don't just live here, I control it. Karen's face turned red. That's not possible. On the contrary, I said calmly. It's very possible and very legal. The HOA can write rules all they want, but those rules don't apply to land you don't own. Her lawyer tried to intervene, flipping through papers and muttering legal jargon. I listened politely, but inside I was enjoying the show. Karen's panic was palpable. She had thought that intimidation, citations, and threats could bend reality to her will. Reality, however, was on my side. Karen leaned closer, whispering sharply, "You'll see, you can't just defy us forever. There will be fines, lawsuits." I held up a hand, stopping her mid-threat. "Karen, I've got everything covered. Fines, meaningless, lawsuits, bring them. Just make sure you understand one thing before you do. The judge is going to ask for proof of ownership, and I have all the proof you'll need. Every document, every deed, every line of survey maps. You're not in charge here. I am." Her hands trembled as she tried to maintain control. She sputtered, then stomped her feet, finally muttering, "This isn't fair. You can't just own everything." I laughed softly. "It's fair because it's true. Ownership isn't about opinion, Karen, it's about facts, and the facts are on my side." Her lawyer sighed, clearly realizing the battle he was walking into, and muttered something about reconsidering legal options. Karen's fuming face said it all. She had underestimated me, and now she was realizing just how badly. I took a deep breath, letting the sunlight hit my face, and walked back to my dock. Every step was deliberate, every movement calm. This was my territory, my rules, my property. And Karen had just learned that you don't intimidate someone who owns the land and expect to win. But even as I felt the first rush of victory, I knew the story wasn't over. Karen's ego wouldn't let her quit. She would escalate further, trying new tactics, maybe even dragging more neighbors or authorities into her campaign. And when she did, it would set the stage for a final confrontation, a showdown that no one in the neighborhood would forget. I leaned back on the dock chair, sipping my coffee, smiling at the ripples on the water. Karen had just discovered the first hard truth. She wasn't in charge. She had been playing a game where the rules didn't apply to her opponent, and that opponent was me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm. The storm was coming, yes, but I wasn't worried. I had the upper hand, and I knew exactly how this would end. Because when someone tries to control what isn't theirs, the only thing left is a reckoning. And Karen was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Karen realizes she has no authority, escalating one final time. The stage is set for her ultimate humiliation, and the neighbors witness the full extent of her miscalculation. It was early morning when I saw her car again. Only this time, something was different. Karen's usual confidence was gone. She wasn't striding with authority, clipboard in hand. Instead, she looked nervous, jittery, almost frantic. I had the feeling she knew she was running out of options, and fast. I was walking along the dock, coffee in hand, when she approached, waving papers frantically. You can't just ignore the HOA. Everyone is supposed to comply," she stammered. I smiled politely. "Karen, I think you've finally realized the problem. I don't just live here, I own here. The house, the dock, the land, most of the block, all mine. The rules you're trying to enforce, they don't apply." Her face went from red to purple in seconds. Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. That's not possible." "Yes," I said calmly, letting the words sink in. "It's very possible, and it's very real. You've been trying to enforce rules on land you don't control, and now everyone can see it." And that's when I noticed something even more delicious. The neighbors had gathered. Slowly at first, then more boldly, drawn by Karen's frantic energy. They peeked over fences, leaned out windows, and whispered among themselves, all while Karen tried to maintain the illusion of control. "You see, Karen," I continued, gesturing around at the crowd, "when you threaten fines, call authorities, or write letters, you only embarrass yourself. Everyone can see who's really in charge here, and it isn't you." Her eyes darted around. I could see her panic mounting. She looked at her clipboard as if it might somehow magically validate her authority. It didn't, not this time. "You can't just, this isn't fair," she shouted, flailing slightly. "Fair?" I asked, tilting my head. "Fair is following the law, Karen, ownership law, and I have all the paperwork to prove it. You've spent weeks trying to control something that wasn't yours, and now, well, the truth is out." The neighbors started murmuring among themselves. Some laughed quietly, others whispered affirmations, and a few even clapped softly, as if applauding her defeat. Karen's face went from disbelief to horror as she realized her reign of self-importance had collapsed in front of everyone. She tried one last desperate tactic. "I'll take this to court. You'll see, you won't get away with this." I leaned forward slightly, voice calm but firm. Karen, you can go to court if you want. I'll happily provide every single document proving my ownership. And when you do, the judge will explain exactly why your threats, fines, and citations mean nothing. Absolutely nothing. Her shoulders slumped. I could see the fight leaving her body, replaced by the heavy weight of realization. She had lost spectacularly. Then, almost instinctively, I added a small, humorous twist. But don't worry, Karen. I promise to keep my property rules reasonable. Like you can still have your garden gnome competition, as long as it stays on your own land. The crowd laughed. Karen sputtered, trying to speak, but no words came out. She muttered under her breath and finally stomped off, heels clicking in defeat. Her entourage of neighbors shuffled behind her, embarrassed, uncertain where they stood in the new order of things. I watched her go, sipping my coffee, letting the satisfaction sink in. For weeks, she had tried to intimidate me, escalate, and humiliate me. And now, the entire neighborhood had seen the truth. Karen's obsession with control had backfired completely. She had underestimated not only my patience, but also the power of facts, authority, and calm confidence. I leaned back on the dock, letting the morning sun hit my face. The water shimmered peacefully, undisturbed by the chaos that had erupted over the past weeks. The storm had passed. For now. Because sometimes the real power isn't in threats, fines, or laws. It's in knowing who truly owns the land, standing firm, and letting the storm destroy itself. And Karen, she had learned that lesson the hard way. The neighbors continued to peek out their windows and shake their heads in disbelief, some offering quiet congratulations. I smiled, knowing that the final confrontation was over, and that the balance of power had been firmly established. Peace is restored, but there's a light-hearted twist as Karen, humiliated, unknowingly follows one of your humorous property rules, leaving everyone, including her, laughing. After Karen's ultimate humiliation, the lake finally returned to its quiet, peaceful state, or so I thought. I was walking along the dock, coffee in hand, the sunlight reflecting off the water in a way that almost felt like a reward for surviving the past few weeks. For once, I could breathe without the constant tension of HOA tyranny hanging over me. I glanced around and noticed the neighbors were finally starting to peek outside. They whispered and smiled, giving subtle nods as they realized the neighborhood had shifted. Karen's reign of absurd rules and intimidation had ended, and the balance of power was clear. For the first time, I allowed myself to relax fully. I even chuckled quietly at the thought of Karen fuming somewhere down the road, trying to figure out how her kingdom had crumbled. But then, I noticed something. Her car had returned. I froze, heart skipping a beat, thinking, not again. Surely she wouldn't dare, but curiosity got the better of me, so I watched from the dock. And there she was, HOA Karen, striding up to my property with the same determined glare, clipboard in hand, muttering under her breath. Here we go again, I muttered to myself, ready for another round. But this time it wasn't about intimidation. It wasn't about fines or citations. It was something different. Karen stopped abruptly at the edge of the property, looking around nervously, clearly unsure where to step. Then she froze, staring at a small wooden sign I had placed weeks earlier as a joke. Private property, no gnome competitions without owner approval. Her eyes widened. She had completely forgotten about it, and in her usual dramatic fashion, she didn't read it fully, she just panicked, imagining some imaginary rule she'd now violated. Oh no, I can't, I should, she muttered, packing back and forth, looking over her shoulder as if the neighbors were watching her every move. And they were. I stepped forward, smiling calmly. Karen, you're on my property, you're free to enjoy it, but remember the rules you agreed to. Her face went pale. She swallowed hard, realizing that even now she had fallen into one of my harmless traps. Her authority, gone, her power, non-existent, her dignity, well, let's just say it was in the lake somewhere. I leaned on the railing, sipping my coffee, and watched as Karen shuffled off, muttering apologies and promises to never come back without approval. The neighbors nearby couldn't help but laugh quietly, shaking their heads at the spectacle. For the first time in weeks, I felt true peace. The lake was calm, the water reflected the sky like glass, and the only sounds were birds singing and the gentle lapping of the waves. And yet I knew this wasn't just about quiet mornings or peaceful afternoons. It was about boundaries, respect, and knowing when someone has overstepped. Karen had tried to push, to intimidate, to control, and she had learned the hard way that authority isn't about titles or clipboards. It's about power that's earned, or in my case, legally owned. I chuckled softly, thinking about all the absurd rules she had tried to enforce. Boat facing north on Tuesdays, lawn gnome regulations, dock alignment mandates, all meaningless, all laughable now. The neighbors started approaching me, some shyly, others boldly, offering congratulations or shaking their heads in disbelief. One neighbor, chuckling quietly, said, "I can't believe she actually thought she could boss you around." I smiled. Neither could I at first, but it turns out patience and paperwork go a long way. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light over the lake, I realized something important. Victory wasn't just about outsmarting Karen. It was about reclaiming peace, asserting boundaries, and teaching a lesson without losing your own sense of calm. And Karen, she had learned that lesson the hard way. But maybe, just maybe, she would think twice before trying to run someone else's property again. I leaned back, letting the warm sun wash over me, and whispered to myself, "This lake, this land, my rules, and finally some peace." The lake rippled softly, the sun sparkled across the water, and for the first time in weeks everything felt exactly as it should. Calm, controlled, and completely mine. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.